She was fired without warning, and everything she had built was stolen. They thought she would disappear, but she built hers from scratch. One call after another, she made her way to where she had once been denied. And then her face appeared on the boardroom screen, and the countdown began. Don't forget to subscribe and like so you don't miss out on new stories. New York was waking up lazily and gently, as if someone were pulling back the curtains from a sunny window. The air was cool and crisp, with a hint of coffee and the distant swish of a Lexington Avenue trolley. Amber walked along 45th Street toward the Vernal and Stone skyscraper, a glass and steel building that reflected the sky as if it were above the clouds. She held a travel cup of coffee from the cafe across the street and a key card that she held between her fingers like a charm. This was supposed to be her day. Today will show you what creativity means, she muttered to herself, smiling at her reflection in the drugstore window. The mug she had used for her morning coffee was still on the kitchen table, white with a gold edge. It seemed like a ritual thing to her, ending the morning. Everything was in its place. Her hair was pulled back into a low bun, her suit was sky gray and ironed, the gleam in her eyes was confident. Today was the presentation she had been working on for 2 months, her project, her concept, her victory, and she felt that today she would have her place at the table she had only looked at before. She walked up to the revolving doors and nodded to the guard at the entrance. "Good morning, Mr. Stevens." "Good morning, Miss Ryan. Big day?" "The biggest one," she nodded with a smile. The elevator rose to the 32nd floor, a familiar height. Reflections of streets, windows, and people flickered behind the glass, seeming tiny. She swiped her card and heard a short beep. Red, not green. She blinked, tried again, red again. "The equipment must be acting up," she muttered, smiling awkwardly at the guard standing next to her. He didn't answer, only looked away. Amber felt a strange heaviness in her chest. It felt like the elevator was falling down again, only this time inside her. She called Linda, the receptionist. Linda came out from behind the counter with a somewhat withdrawn smile. Hi. You're expected in the Lakewood conference room. Who is waiting for me?" "Human Resources Department. Shall we go?" The conference room was too bright. Glass walls, a white table, chrome chairs. Everything looked clean and formal. There were 2 people in the room, Martha from HR and a young man with a badge that said, Deputy HR Manager. No Jared, no Lena. No one she considered one of us. "Amber," Martha said, smoothing her hair, "we have to inform you that as of today, your position is eliminated. It's part of a strategic restructuring of the company." "What?" Amber's voice was dry, almost hoarse. "Are you kidding?" "We understand how unexpected this is," the young man began. "I have a presentation today," she interrupted. "I've been working on it for 2 months. Jared confirmed the meeting for Monday. What's going on?" "The presentation will take place with Lena." Amber felt everything inside her sink, like the floor beneath her had crumbled and she was falling, into silence, into emptiness, into terror. "She's my assistant. I taught her to read briefs. Unfortunately, the decision is final. We will give you 30 minutes to pack your things." "Wait," she breathed. "Nobody told me anything. No warning, no letter, no call. This is a mistake. Jared." "Jared won't be available today," Martha said quietly. Amber sat there, frozen in a dream. Through the glass, she saw Lena was already in her office, sitting in her chair. Jared was standing next to her, saying something to her, pointing to the board with the plans. They were both smiling. They didn't even let her leave before they started living her life. As she walked through the department, no one looked up. The colleagues with whom she had spent the night working on projects suddenly remembered urgent calls. Someone looked away. Someone disappeared into the restroom. There were no words, no hugs, no goodbyes, Just a cardboard box containing her life, a photo with her mother, a ceramic figurine from a trip to Savannah, an award plaque that read, "For an unconventional approach," and her plant. A small zamioculcas that had survived against all odds, even when she forgot to water it. The guard at the exit nodded to her. He didn't know what to say. "Just tell them I'm still here," she whispered. "I'll tell you," he answered, not looking her in the eyes. There was a light breeze outside. September had not yet become cold, but there was something sharp about it. She sat down on a bench near the building, put the box next to it, and looked up. The building was the same, but it was no longer hers. The phone was silent. The emails from the corporate email were gone. The LinkedIn profiles were private. The people she taught, mentored, shared coffee and reports with seemed to have erased her. Someone had even managed to erase her name from the project. In an industry newsletter, she saw an article about a new creative genius. And it was Lena. Even the headline was the same one Amber had come up with 2 months ago. It's as if someone decided that she never existed. The house smelled of silence and spilled milk from yesterday's latte. She turned on the light, but it didn't warm her up. She grabbed her pajamas and climbed into bed in broad daylight. No calls, no letters, just silence. She lay there unable to get up until it got dark outside. The phone lit up. Unknown number. She didn't answer. Another one, and another. Creditors. Reminders. It all fell out like sand between her fingers. At 3 a.m, she sat on the bathroom floor, her back to the cold tile, staring at the screen. Social media was full of smiles and victories. Lena was there. Jared was there. In front of the industry conference Amber was about to attend. He had his arm around her shoulders. The caption, "Starting a new era." "This was my era," Amber whispered. "Mine." The tears came late, like a guest who was not expected but who could not be driven out. She cried silently until the phone rang. On the screen, "Mom." "My girl." The voice was soft, like a baby blanket. "What happened?" Amber didn't answer. She just breathed, noisily, intermittently. "They took your job," said the mother. "But don't let them take your talent, too." The phrase sounded like a shot, not destroying but awakening. Amber sat in silence for a long time, holding her phone. Then she stood up. She put the box down on the floor, took out a gold-rimmed mug, and poured herself some coffee. Real coffee. Not instant. A real mug. A real woman. And there is only one decision in my head. No one will make me invisible again. The morning began with silence that sounded louder than any alarm clock. The room was cold, not because the heating had been turned off, but because the walls no longer reflected movement, plans, life. Everything around her seemed frozen, as if someone had put her life on pause. Amber got up not because she needed to hurry somewhere, but because sleep had become unbearable. The kitchen was filled with the faint smell of last night's coffee. The windows were fogged up, and the usual city noise raged outside, cars, horns, footsteps. The world was moving on, and it wasn't waiting for her. She turned on the light, as if she hoped it would bring clarity, but instead she saw her face reflected in the glass oven door, tired, alien. She sat down at the table with a notebook she hadn't opened for a long time. Its pages had once been filled with ideas, scattered, bold, alive. Now she simply opened the first blank one and looked at it for a long time, as if the page was the first to speak. "What if we start again?" she muttered, picking up the pen hesitantly. "What if we try something different?" The lines began to appear, slowly at first, as if each word had to be pulled from within, but then they began to flow. A list. Problems the company was ignoring, ideas it was not allowed to implement, customers it could have kept. It wasn't a complaint. It was a plan, a foundation, a framework for something that didn't yet exist, but was already there. She cleaned the apartment until it squeaked. Every rag, every discarded container was like a cleansing. The washed mirror in the bathroom reflected, for the first time in a week, not despair, but determination. Small, barely noticeable, but real. By lunchtime, she was already sitting at her laptop. She opened a new document. Title: Glass Hill Creative, the name that had come to her in a dream a year ago. Back then, it had seemed pretentious. Now it felt right. Transparent, strong, growing, the way she wanted to be seen. She laid the foundation: services, concepts, values. She wrote, "People work here not for the names on the doors, but for the meaning in their work." In the evening, she went out to the nearest coffee shop, Bean Theory, a small place on the corner of 11th and Broome with soft lighting and the smell of ground beans. The barista, a guy with tattoos and a careless braid, looked at her with mild surprise. "Aren't you the one who used to have a cappuccino with cinnamon every morning?" "Yes," Amber smiled. "Only now I'm here all day." He nodded without asking any further questions. He brought her coffee without a word, as if he knew she hadn't come here to talk. There was a couple at the nearest table, a guy in headphones and a girl typing furiously on a laptop. No one was looking at her, and that was liberating. She laid out her laptop and notebook and started writing letters. To the first clients she had been hesitant to approach, to people whose projects had once stalled because of fear of change. She reread the first letter 6 times, deleted it, wrote it again. "Just send it," she said out loud to herself. "The worst has already happened." She hit send. It felt weird, like she'd jumped off the edge without checking to see if she had a parachute. The next day, one person responded. George, the owner of a small eco-design company. He remembered her from a meeting 2 years ago. "You made an impression then. What is your project?" Amber cried when she read it. Not from joy, but from how long it had been since anyone had spoken to her without condescension or fear. They met in the park, on a bench by the lake. George came in a sweatshirt with a thermos of coffee. "Are you still as energetic?" "More stubborn," she chuckled. She showed him the presentation, the one they hadn't let her give at Vernell and Stone. George listened attentively, nodded, asked questions. "It's bold," he said at last, "but that's precisely the strength." "So, you are ready to take a risk?" He smiled. "I wouldn't have come if I hadn't been ready." After he left, Amber sat for another 10 minutes, looking at the lake. It reflected the sky, and in that reflection she suddenly saw, the sky is bigger than any building. Back home, she opened a new document. She wrote, "Client, Juror 1, Eco Space George Miller," then the next target, and the next. Each name like a nail, hammered into a new structure. On the 3rd day, she came to the coffee shop again. The barista greeted her with a nod. "As always?" "Yes. And by the way, my name is Amber." He extended his hand across the counter. Dion. That evening, she printed out the logo, taped it to the wall above her desk, and turned on the music. The room filled with the sounds of jazz. It no longer felt like a refuge from life. It was now a headquarters, a place where meaning was born. On the wall in the kitchen, she put up sticky notes: mission, values, clients, strength in honesty. Courage is a must. The next morning, when she woke up, she no longer felt the heaviness. Only a slight, almost invisible tension, like a taut string before the first chord. And this was no longer the silence of emptiness, but the silence before the beginning. The sun was rising behind the rooftops, spreading warm light across the brick facades and running in golden spots across the glass window of the coffee shop on the corner. Amber sat by the window at her regular table at Bean Theory, drawing circles in the margins of her notebook, connected by arrows. They were crooked, but each arrow represented something more: a step, a direction, a thought. A world she was building from scratch. Dion, as always, wordlessly placed her cinnamon latte on the table and nodded softly. "You're somehow different inside yourself now," he said quietly. Amber looked up. "Is this bad other?" He smiled as he wiped the counter. "It's different, as if you already know what will happen next, even if you don't." "It's funny," she said, taking a sip, "because inside I feel like I'm out on a tightrope every day without a net." He nodded without adding another word, and that silence was more necessary than any support. The morning was flowing through the windows, and with it came ideas. She worked like a madwoman. She wrote, called, offered. There were many refusals, like short clicks of doors closing in front of a face. But even one yes among 10 no's seemed like a victory. George was the first, then came Laura and Kim, 2 owners of a vintage boutique who wanted to launch an advertising campaign but were afraid of wasting their budget. "Why you?" Kim asked at the meeting. "You're just starting out." "Because I know what it's like to have no one believe in you," Amber said, looking straight ahead. "And so I'll put more than just design into your project. I'll put proof in it." After the meeting, Laura leaned towards her. "Convincing, Ryan. You know how to rock." By Friday, she had 4 projects and only 1 pair of hands. She realized she couldn't do it alone anymore when, at 3 a.m., she was finishing her 3rd layout and felt her hand go numb from fatigue. That same morning, she received an email from Brianna Hale, a former colleague who was fired a month after her. "I heard you started something of your own. If you need help, I'm here. I can't wait any longer for someone to decide I'm worth their while." Amber didn't hesitate. They met at the same coffee shop. Brianna was wearing jeans, with her hair tied back and a tired look in her eyes. "Do you really want to take me?" she asked, wrapping her hands around the cup. "Even knowing how I was thrown out?" "That's exactly why," Amber replied. "Because you know what it's like to be thrown out. And that means you won't let any of our customers feel that way." They worked together from her apartment. The dining room table became a communal table. Brianna spread her papers on the windowsill. They shared markers, coffee, fatigue, and excitement. The whiteboard on the wall, an old school one, became their altar. They wrote down clients' names, taped up ideas, drew diagrams. Each new name was a flash. "We should find an office," Brianna remarked one day, adjusting her tail. "Or at least a chair that doesn't creak with every movement," Amber laughed. They rented a room in a converted warehouse in Chelsea. The space was tiny, 1 window, 1 table, 2 lamps, but they fell in love with it at first sight. "It smells like wood and hope in here," Brianna said. They stuck a piece of paper on the wall with the title, "Our Growth Map." Below were handwritten steps: 5 clients, first freelancer, office with kitchen, coffee machine, going to the press. They laughed as they wrote, but with some kind of childish faith. They worked 14, 16 hours a day. Sometimes they forgot to eat. Amber wore the same jeans for 3 days in a row until Brianna bought her a fresh t-shirt with the words "CEO of my own life" written on it. "It's a gift," she said, throwing the bag on the table, "and a reason to do laundry at least once a week." Sometimes in the evening they walked along the embankment, exchanging stories: who betrayed them, who supported them, who inspired them. They talked about the future. "I want people who were underestimated to work for us someday," Amber said, looking at the water. "So that they come here not for status, but for a chance." "We'll do it," Brianna nodded. "We already have the foundation of resentment and coffee." At the conference they finally managed to attend, Amber heard Jared's voice, her former boss, behind her. "She? What is she doing now, blogging about startups?" He laughed at someone. "A nice project, of course. But none of the serious clients will choose her. Too many emotions, too few resources." Amber turned around, but he didn't notice her. She didn't say a word. She just pulled out her phone and wrote in her notes, "They still don't understand who I am." The next morning, a letter arrived. A request for a meeting from Viridis Tech, a medium-sized business with potential. It had once proposed a strategy that was rejected. Now, they had come up with it themselves. "Remember me?" she wrote back. "This time I'm ready to hear yes." They met in their new office. The Viridis Tech representatives listened to her presentation and then said, "Interesting. This is exactly what we were missing." When they left, Brianna sat down next to him, looking at the whiteboard. "We need to add a point. Show everyone who said no how wrong they were." "No," Amber shook her head. "The point would be, make our yes mean more than their no." They printed out a new sheet. Growth Map 2.0. The first bullet point read, "We've already started." All of January, Amber lived as if inside a blizzard. Everything was fast, everything was on edge, but with the clarity that only comes from real movement. Projects multiplied, clients came by recommendation, the team grew to 6 people. Their office was still cramped, but now it was noisy and lively. Someone was talking on the phone, someone was standing at a whiteboard, someone was bringing food, while others were drawing logos or arguing about the color of the button on the landing page. On the wall next to the window was a board labeled Signals, where they'd pinned the names of companies that seemed out of reach, but potentially important. At the very top, written in red marker, was Atlas Corp. "Do you think we have a chance?" Brianna asked, standing by the window with her mug. "They're working with, well, you know who." "Exactly," Amber answered quietly. "And I know what they don't have." Atlas Corp was a whale, a company that accounted for nearly a third of Vernell and Stone's revenue. Getting them wasn't just about winning, it was about changing the game. Amber spread notebooks, documents, printouts, everything related to Atlas, on the floor. For a week, she read reports, studied the market, compared steps. The communications map grew on the wall like a spider's web. She created a table: who was connected to whom, who communicated with whom, who made decisions. "Are we going to go in there head-on?" asked Peter, one of the designers. "Not head-on," Amber shook her head. "We'll knock on every door until one opens." She started with cold calls, 20, 30 a day. Each time a new department, a new name, a new voice. "Good afternoon. This is Amber Ryan from Glass Hill Creative," she said with polite determination. "I'd like to discuss a possible collaboration." "We already have an agency," came the answer. Or, "We are not interested in new proposals." Or, "Thank you, but we are not considering outsourcing." On the third day, she began to change tactics. She called on behalf of the Analytical Initiative, introducing herself as a market researcher. She collected fragments: who comes early, who always answers the phone after 6, who has a secretary with a child whom he always mentions. "This isn't sales anymore," Brianna said. "This is intelligence." "This is war," Amber corrected. "And every name is access. Every contact is a chance." By day 14, she had a spreadsheet of 56 names: blue, loyal; gray, neutral; red, those who hung up. Her laptop had become a battlefield where strategies were being plotted. "Maybe you should rest," Laura suggested cautiously. "You haven't slept well for 4 nights." "I'm sleeping," Amber waved it off. "When I close my eyes, I see the presentation. It's almost like meditation. The day when everything changed was ordinary. Wet snow outside the windows, dim light. On the 49th call, a man with a hoarse voice said, "Amber Ryan, aren't you the same girl who spoke at Digital Next 3 years ago? You had a section on creative redesign of B2B products." "It was me," she said, and felt her heart pounding. "I remember you. You said something about brainstorming without falsehood. It was powerful. I have 5 minutes. Tell me what you have." Those 5 minutes were the gateway. 2 days later, she received a letter. "The Atlas Corp board is considering new partners. We can give you a 20-minute slot next week." There was silence when Amber read this to the team. Then Peter raised his hands in the air, like at the end of the game. "Who said this was madness?" he shouted. "Who?" "Everyone," Brianna said. "But we're not alone in our madness." For the next 5 days, they worked around the clock. The presentation was honed like a performance. Every word, every slide, every animation was checked 10 times. On the whiteboard they wrote, "We did not come to prove, we came to show." "Are you ready?" Brianna asked on the day of the meeting. "Like for real?" "I was ready the day my past turned red," Amber replied. The entrance to the Atlas Corp building was mirrored and cold. Amber stepped into the lobby in a navy suit, sleek hair, minimal makeup. All she had was a clipboard and confidence. Her name was on a list. The elevator rose quickly, the glass walls giving views of the city. The conference room was spacious and formal. A large table, dark wood walls, a screen at the end. People in the room spoke quietly, shuffling papers, and there were faces, familiar ones, from Vernell and Stone, Lane, now senior strategist, Jared against the wall, scrolling through his tablet. He looked up and froze. Amber walked over to the table, put down the materials, and looking straight ahead said, "You may remember me. I used to work for the agency you are now hiring. Today I am here on behalf of a new company, one built on what was ignored." There was silence in the room. Not a single eye darted. She didn't mention the firing. There was no need. Their faces said it all. The presentation lasted 17 minutes. She spoke clearly, simply. She showed how they would solve problems that others only looked at, how they would propose ideas that others were afraid to think about, blind spots, missed opportunities, technologies that no one dared to touch. When she finished, the only sound in the room was breathing. "Does anyone have any questions?" she asked. The first to speak was the senior vice president of development. "Yes, one. When can you start?" Amber smiled. "Tomorrow. Or today. As you wish." In the evening, they opened cheap champagne in the office. They drank from plastic cups. Someone turned on music. Someone brought pizza. "This is just the beginning," Amber said, raising her toast. "But what a beautiful one it is." The morning was foggy. The city was humid. The streets were covered with a thin veil, as if New York had decided to hide its corners. Amber stood in front of the Vernell and Stone building, the one where it all ended. The one that had seemed impenetrable, monolithic, alien. Now it seemed like a glass shell with a forgotten past inside. She didn't come for revenge. She came to say goodbye. From the other side of the street, everything was visible, like in a theater. A conference room on the second floor, panoramic windows, shadows of faces, sharp gestures, a table at which people were sitting. Amber recognized Jared immediately. He stood, sorting through slides, graphs going down, his movements becoming more and more sharp. Next to him sat Lena, now in an expensive suit, a pen clenched in her fingers, a dull look, the look of a man who is no longer sure whose side he is on. Amber looked down. There was a coffee in her hand. Unlidded, steam rose in lazy wisps. Everything inside was calm, almost frighteningly calm. That's what happens when you finally realize you don't expect an apology, that you don't need anyone to tell you you were wrong, because they already know. There was a commotion inside. One of the men stood up, pointed at the screen. Jared said something, but the gesture was cut short as the CEO slammed the table, and even from the street you could see the water in the glasses shake. He said something, slowly and clearly, pointing at the screen. Jared turned the laptop around, and in that moment Amber saw her website, the Glass Hill page, her face, her logo, her name. "Who is she?" she read from his lips. "And why didn't we stop her?" She didn't wait to see how the meeting ended. She took a sip of coffee, straightened the collar of her coat, and turned around. The sun was beginning to break through the fog, uncertainly but insistently. The Glass Hill office was filled with light and voices. It smelled of paper, fresh croissants, and a little adrenaline. Someone was printing documents, someone was discussing fonts, someone was playing music, old jazz, which had more life in it than the entire block. "Amber, we have 2 new inquiries," Laura said, meeting her at the door. One is from a former client of Vernell's. They're starting to get it, Amber chuckled. Great. Send it to your priority folder. In a small conference room, they discussed the upcoming advertising campaign. Amber conducted the meeting calmly, as if there had been no red card, no box of things, no 49 phone calls. We're not just offering a strategy, she said. We're offering a different perspective. We're not saying how it should be. We're asking, what if? After the meeting, Brianna sat down next to her with a tablet. Did you see that you were mentioned in marketing news? The article is called The Story That Should Have Been Heard. It looks like they've started listening. Are you happy? Amber glanced out the window where the wind stirred the transparent blinds. Outside, a light snow was falling, the first of the winter. I am more than happy. I am free. They celebrated the Atlas Corp contract, not at a restaurant or a party. They gathered on the roof of the office with thermoses of mulled wine, wrapped in blankets, laughing and looking at the city lights. What are you toasting to? Brianna asked, handing her the mug. Amber smiled and looked up at the sky. For the card that lit up red, for the box with the photo, for the people who didn't believe, for every door that was slammed in my face, because that was the beginning. To Glass Hill, Peter said, to a company where no one is invisible. Later, as they parted ways, Amber lingered on the roof. The city beneath her shone like a living machine, but she no longer felt like a cog. She was an architect. She took out her phone and opened the note she had written that night in the bathroom. There was only one sentence. If they try to erase you, don't ask to be noticed. Build something that can't be ignored. Amber hit delete. She no longer needed these words.